Gaudete Christus es natus, ex Maria Virgine gaudete.
Welcome to another episode of the Rediscovery channel, where each time we look at a different part of history that the other person may not have heard of. And my name is Stilgar, and I'm here with my good friend Ivor. And Ivor, this time I want to talk to you about a little bit about Dutch naval history. Do you know a little bit about it, or how much do you know about it, rather?
I know almost nothing at all, except for the video you did where we talked about the battle where they came up and invaded England. And
Yes.
then I know that they were big explorers, even though most people talk about Spain and Portugal and England, but there was also Dutch colonies and a lot of trade, and also colonized that island. What was it called? Not Mauritania. Yeah, Mauritius. Colonized Mauritius. Other than that, nothing.
Okay. Well, this predates that war a little bit. So that was one of the English wars. So one of the I think we discussed all four of them, where the Dutch were fighting with the English over supremacy of the seas. Um, Mainly because the English people or the English were trying to come up with all these rules and legislations where you could only transport to their colonies on English ships, and you couldn't use any ships from the Netherlands. And at the time, the Netherlands was the largest shipping country in the world. Like if you look at nowadays, if you see all these naval ships transporting containers all around the world, I think they're mostly Chinese nowadays. Well, back in the day, I think it was around 90% of those ships transporting goods around the world were Dutch, and they were typically either part of the VOC, which is the Verenigd Oost-Indische Compagnie, and which is also the first corporation or incorporated form, which was sailing on the East Indies mostly, so current day Indonesia, but also other places in that area, like you mentioned, Mauritius. And then there was the West Indies, and the West Indies had places like New Amsterdam, which was later taken by the English, but also places along the South American coast, like nowadays Suriname. And the West Indies was more engaged in which was called which was a legitimate form of warfare at the time, was basically piracy in the name of your country, which was quite popular at the time. And actually, that was also very much done by the English against the Dutch, especially by the Scots. Apparently, there were a lot of Scottish pirates in the North Sea that would try and take ships from the Dutch, from the Netherlands, and take them to them. But this story, I want to talk to you about a particular sea hero. So there are several sea heroes that are well known here in the Netherlands. The one that is known the best is Michel de Ruiter, or Michiel de Ruiter in Dutch. But I happened to come across a book about a Norwegian guy called Cort Adeler, or Cort Sivertsen Adeler, and he changed his name after he moved to the Netherlands. But he grew up in a small town in Norway called Brevik, which had probably about 200 people or so at the time. And Brevik was part of the wood trade. So, because Netherlands had this huge naval, all these ships going around the world, these were made out of wood at the time. And because the Netherlands didn't have any wood left, they would buy a lot of their wood from Scandinavia, including Norway, which at the time was still part of Denmark. So it was actually the Danish-Norwegian Empire. So Norway was a colony of Denmark, as was Greenland, I believe Iceland, I think the Faroe Islands, and there are a few others. I'm not sure about the Faroe Islands. What are they called? I have to look it up. But anyway, Denmark had quite a few colonies. I believe they also had a colony in Africa, one if I'm not mistaken. But Norway was one of them. But this town where he was living, his dad was actually selling the wood, and he was one of the traders there. And at one point, he had a relationship in the Netherlands that was buying the wood, and he saw an opportunity to send his son to Hoorn, which is a town in North Holland, where there was a lot of shipbuilding at the time. There was a naval academy there. Well, a naval academy, more like a naval location. And a lot of the ships were built there. And Kurt was sent there as a 12-year-old boy to this town of 10,000 people, which probably was a lot to them, coming out of a town of 200. Where he would basically start as a sailor, so at the bottom of the ranks, but with somebody that his dad knew. So as a 12-year-old boy, he left, and he wouldn't come back for years. So he wouldn't come back till many years later. So he came to this town. He already learned to speak the language quite quickly, because people back in the day spoke neither English or any kind of trade language. They would just find a way to communicate with each other regardless. And I think probably Kurt already learned quite a bit of Dutch from all the Dutch sailors that would frequent his town. In his time, he would start his way up as a small sailor. So he changed his last name to Adelborst, which is like a Dutch name for like one of the lowest ranks in the navy. And he at the time there was like no real naval academy. So if you went to school, like what you would learn was like basic math to figure out things like how fast is the ship going, and like for example, when you're thinking about some of these like the word like how do you measure the speed of a ship at sea? What kind of measurement do you use for that? Do you know?
Nautical miles, right? Or knots?
Yes, knots. And do you know where the why they're using knots, where that word comes from?
I don't.
Okay, so basically what they did is they had an anchor with knots on it, on a rope with knots, and they would throw it out in the water, and then they would have a counter, like a sand glass, that would count down, and the amount of knots on the rope that would pass off the like a swivel, they would use that to calculate the speed that they were going on the ocean. So that's where the word knots from nautical miles comes from.
But why is it spelled N-A-U-T, whereas
Yeah.
not
Mhm.
like Utah is K-N-O-T?
Yeah, but you can also write it so many knots per hour. Um, so if you go to your search machine, you type in knots per hour, it will show you how a knot is a unit of speed equal to 1 nautical mile per hour. So if
Maybe
somebody's
it's some.
traveling at 1 knot, it's going about 1.151 land miles per hour.
Hmm.
So that actually comes from knots. And then another thing was they had a log. Do you know why it's called captain's log?
Because the captain records all of the journal entries in that.
Yeah, and they actually had a literal log where they would carve they had sand hourglasses with
Mhm.
30 minutes in it, and they had two of each. So for an hour they would flip them around so to keep track of the hour, and then after each hour they would know, like they would, well, I could be wrong here on the details if it was every half hour, every hour, um, but they would put like a mark in a log to keep track of like their direction, their speed, etc. Because the only way they could know where they were going was by figuring out where they were and then the speed and the direction they were going. So they were using quite rudimentary ways to figure out where they were at sea, especially if there were no coastal areas where they could just use landmarks. They would have to use other means like using a compass, using their average speed. They actually started measuring their speeds before they had the knots on the rope. They would just throw a log at the front of the ship, and then calculate how long it took for it to hit the end of the ship. And then knowing the length of the ship and the time it took from the front to the end of the ship, they could have a rough estimation of how fast they were going. So quite different time of naval seamanship, I would say. I think it was also very interesting. Another one is they would also measure their the depth of the water to see where they were. So they would have some like a huge wire with a piece of lead on it, and they would literally sink it to the bottom of the ocean or of the sea to get an idea of where they were, how far they were from the coast, etc. And this was oftentimes during very rough seas. And being a sailor at the time was a very dangerous job. So a lot of them died. If you're looking at the ones that went to like the East Indies, the sailors, um, around 40% of the people that went on that kind of trip, that would easily take a year, they would die, either from falling overboard, from pirates. Like you had the pirates in that were allied to the Ottomans that we discussed in a story a long time ago about the white slave trade of the
The
Ottomans,
Barbary
the
pirates.
Barbary pirates, exactly. Um, so there was piracy to worry about, and then a huge killer was also just health, because people had they didn't have fresh water, so they would take water on board, but after a while it would just get really disgusting. So they would prefer to drink ale or beer with a low level of alcohol, but at least it had been cooked, so they knew it was cleaner. But of course, they would run out of it. And then all the food they had was like dried stuff. So it was like dried and salted beef or salted meats. And of course, you had, now I can't think of the name, like the porridge kind of stuff that they will eat, like that they make fun of when it's like pirate videos and stuff. Anyway.
Like the gruel? Is that
Yeah,
it?
pretty much. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and plus, they had no sanitations. They would basically just poop right into the ocean, and they were all stuffed together. And you had lots of diseases like, like pneumonia, deadly disease, but also typhus. The typhus disease was a bad one, and then scheurbuik, which is like lack of vitamin C. Now I can think of the name of it in English in a way, but
Scurvy.
scurvy. Yeah.
I think
Anyway,
so, yeah.
yeah, scurvy. So yeah, so it was a very, very deadly profession to say the least. But Kurt Adeler, he learned the basics really quickly, and he moved up the ranks. He learned how to do the math that was necessary, and and it was basically learning by doing. There was no school, so you just had to go. They would train you. You would have a master. They would train you, and they had very harsh discipline. So if you didn't follow the rules, they would like keel haul you, which is basically they would drag you from one side to the other side of the ship, which you may or may not survive. They had all kinds of pretty harsh penalties when it came to life on board of the ship. and all of that was up to the captain, pretty much, who was like judge and executioner at the same time. But yeah, so Kurt came here to Horn. Was a busy place. 10,000 people doesn't sound like much. Amsterdam was much bigger already with over 100,000 people. But it was a lot of bars, a lot of people coming there to resupply these boats, these merchant ships, because they would need new crews all the time because a lot of them would not make it back after going because of all the dangers. Now, Kurt worked himself up to the ranks, and then he there was a big war because the Dutch republics. So you had the seven republics or seven provinces that were part of the Dutch Republic. Um, it it broke away of the Spanish Empire, and because the Dutch, they adopted a Calvinist form of Christianity. There was because of this, there was this idea in France that they had to first of all reestablish their governance over the Netherlands, which was part of their empire as they saw it, and of course also to drive the Inquisition to exterminate Calvinism as we had it here in the Netherlands.
I got a question, still, guy.
Mhm.
Were
Yeah.
they just so you said the French? They wanted to take back over, right?
No, it's the Spaniards. So we were
Okay.
part of, yeah, we were part of the Spanish Empire. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Inquisition, were they trying to terminate just the Calvinists, or were they trying to get rid of all Protestants, all forms of it?
They were trying to get rid of all Protestants. It was just that Calvinism was the main form of Protestantism here. And Kurt, he was actually a Lutheran because the people in Norway, they were Lutherans. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, Norway and Denmark, I think, and Sweden as well. It's mostly Lutheran. So yeah. Anyway, so there was a huge armada sent this way, and the English were actually at the time still helping the Spaniards to some extent, which led to this naval battle between the Dutch under this Dutch naval legend, which is called Maarten Tromp, and Kurt, he served in this armada. It was about 100 ships, and against about an equal sized group of ships on the Spanish Armada side. And they had a battle at Dunkirk, and then they had the battle at Downs, right outside of the coast of Dover. Um, and basically, what happened was the Spaniards lost about 15,000 men and 60 ships, and the fleet of the Republic only one ship and about 100 men. So it was a complete destruction of the Spanish Armada. And a lot of that was because of the Dutch ability to sail. It was mostly smaller ships with great seamanship, but also the fact that they had larger cannons, and they used a lot of burner ships, which is ships that they would fill up with flammable materials. They would lock them in on a course towards the enemy ships, set them on fire, and basically use them as kamikaze or like a some kind of ancient form of missile that would then hit the enemy uh, armada and set it on fire. So yeah, so that was his first experience, and because of this, Kurt was extremely brave during this fighting, and because of this, he was made captain on his own ship, and so he became the captain of the ship called. Uh, Now I want to see if he can find the ship. What the name it was? The San Giorgio Grande. So it was the Grote St. Joris or the Big St. George, but it was later called the San Giorgio Grande. And basically, the ship was like an investment company. So people would, at the time, they would buy parts of a ship. So you would buy like 10% of ship A, 10% of ship B, and that would be your investment because it was very risky. People would try to spread out their investment across several ships, and you would have like part ownership. And the ship that Kurt was sailing on, so the Great Saint Joris or the Grand San Giorgio Grande, it was owned by about 12 people, and typically the captain would have a part ownership in that as well. So whenever there was like they would trade, or they would get money, like a commission would be paid, and each one would get part of their commission based on how much they would own of the ship. And if they would capture an enemy ship, for example, in wartime, that could be an incredible amount of money. So it's a very high risk way of making money, but because they had small ownerships of multiple ships, typically, it was a way to spread your risk. And of course, at the time, the Amsterdam was extremely wealthy because there was so much trade happening across Cape Horn, which is called after Horn, where Kurt was doing his training, and then all the way to the Indies, because it went away. The spice trade went a different way than it went previously. After it had to go through the Middle East. And of course, then you would have to get all kinds of middlemen. It would have to be traded over caravans, and then finally it would be shipped by Venetians, merchants, who would buy it from the Turks, and they would then sell it to Europe. So this was a way around it, and extreme amounts of wealth were flooding to the Netherlands. Also because the Netherlands was more liberal when it came to different religions. So, for example, there was a lot of talent fleeing from Spain and Portugal and other places coming to the Netherlands to invest. Kind of what happened to New York, I think, in later years.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mention New York, because of course New York was originally a Dutch colony called New Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And while you were talking about the owning shares in the boats, I was thinking, man, it sounds a lot like Wall Street. But of course, Wall Street is also set up by Dutch colonists. Like, the original name was Wall Street, and it was used for banking, and businesses were there. I think Wall Street was actually established as a financial center before the United States got its independence from England.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Wall Street is the whole name is Dutch to begin with. So I think that was part of the Dutch settlers there as well.
Right. Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
It was a Dutch colony, and I was thinking, man, I can see how Wall Street was totally a Dutch invention. It sounds like they were doing it before even coming to this part of the world.
mm,
Same kind of idea, owning
yeah,
shares and multiplying the wealth.
yeah, and so there's a lot of there was a lot of money in Amsterdam, and of course there were still, I mean, there were a lot of Calvinists, so there was a lot of people that were radically religious, and actually Kurt Adeler, I want to go towards his next move. So he did have a kid out of wedlock in Horn with I think her name was Angel or Engeltje, who he ended up marrying later, but not until like years later, after he came back from serving in the Venetian navy. So in Venice, they were slowly losing power to the Turks, the Ottomans, because previously they were doing really well. They were getting a lot of this spice trade, and they would take it from the or buy it from the Turks and then sell it to Europe, and they had built an extremely powerful empire as well as a strong navy. While the Ottoman Empire was slowly expanding, creeping itself further and further into Europe. Um, and of course, we all know how far they made it. They made it all the way to the gates of Vienna,
Yeah.
which is basically towards in the heart of Europe. They were a force to be reckoned with, and because actually the Venetians were also facing a lot of competition from the Dutch and later from the English that would find different trade routes. They were also losing money, and so some of the wealth, because it's an extremely wealthy city. I've been there before. It's beautiful. If you ever have a time to go, have a look. Although it's probably extremely touristy, it already was when I saw it. I don't know, 30 years ago. But it's a beautiful city to look at. Um, but they built this empire, the Phoenicians, which I think is probably worth a topic all by itself. Just how far they made it, and they also had a form of a republic with a monarch, but with a lot less power. Basically, it was ruled by a small wealthy elite that would rule this Phoenician empire, and they owned islands throughout the Mediterranean Sea, including islands like Crete, Cyprus. But they were starting to lose those to the Turkish fleet that were bent on taking taking the island of I think it was Crete. That was the main one because if they were able to take that one, they knew that they could take over all the naval power over the Mediterranean. And the reason is that they wanted to do this. They already owned all the Barbary states, so that's Northern Africa, what's nowadays Tunisia, Morocco, these countries. They already had those in under their power, and they had the Barbary pirates working for them there. But they wanted more. They wanted to first of all they wanted to fight a jihad, and they wanted to take control of the entire Mediterranean. So yeah, if you look at Crete, it's actually smack like center of the Mediterranean Sea. So if they were able to take it, they would be able to control pretty much most of the naval activity in the Mediterranean Sea.
Do you
Uh,
know when they took Cyprus? Because, like, I know today Cyprus is an independent country, and but it's like partly Greek and partly Turkish, so it's kind of split. There's some issues there. Um, but yeah, of course, originally it was Greek and part of the Byzantine Empire, and the Turks took it. And same as I guess true for Crete. Also used to be, Roman and Byzantine and a Greek place. I guess Crete still is, but Cyprus looks like okay. Yeah, they must have taken Cyprus a good deal earlier.
yeah, I think it was looking it up as we speak. I think 1570, 1573. But they would put together these huge naval battle fleets that was the Ottomans would that would consist mostly out of now I can think of the name of the ship. So over here in the north they would use sailing ships and sailing
Mhm.
ships and technology. Over there they would still be using the traditional boats where you would have to row, which are called, come on, what are they called, Silgar?
Triremes. Is that
Uh no, no, that's not it. What are they called?
the
Anyway, you'll
Greeks
call.
also? Or sorry, the Turks. They also had sails. Maybe they
Yeah.
had rowing for when the wind gets slow. They made use of slaves anyways
Yes, they
to
used
row the
slave.
ships.
Yes, they used slaves for those galleys. So galleys were the ones that they would use because the Mediterranean is closed off sea for the most part. Of course, there's an entrance to the Atlantic, but it's a pretty easy sea for the most part if you compare it to the North Sea, and especially if you compare it to the Atlantic. So they would have these galleys that were pretty low, about like a meter to 2 meters above water, which is I think about 6 feet above the water.
Hmm.
And these were operated by about 200 to 400 rowers. Most of the time, they were slaves that were captured by the Ottomans that would live a very painful and very short life. And these galleys also had they also had sails, like they had a small sail in the middle, but they were a different ship than the ships that were used by the Dutch, for example. So the Dutch ships they didn't have any row or spades. They were because of that they were much taller. They could travel much. They could withstand rougher seas, and they could travel faster as long as there was wind. And because they were bigger, they also had more room for cannons. So they were more heavily armed than the galleys were. But if you're looking at some of these galley ships, like the Ottomans would send to Crete, and they did manage to land at Crete on Crete at some point, even though the Venetians were trying to keep them off, and the Pope would try to help them as well and send some people over now and then. And they also had this group over there that was stealing ships called the Order of. Oh my gosh, we've done a video on them. What are they called again?
The Hospitalers.
Yes, the Order of Hospitallers. The Venetians were not too happy about them because they would, they knew that the Sultan was just looking for an excuse to invade Crete, and finally they did so, and they hired Cort Adeler to fight for them. And he brought his ship with him. And the technique of that the Venetians used was basically to try and keep the Turks from sending more resupplies to Crete because Crete was being was under siege for many actually it ended up for many decades. And what they would do is the Venetians they would go to the port right around the time when they thought that the Ottomans would leave, and they would block the port. And then of course they would try to. It was very hard because they needed to have fresh water, and as you know, the water would go bad, and then the Turks would try to make sure that they didn't have access to that water with varying actually quite successful. So that made their life very difficult. Um, and then they would basically stop the Ottomans from exiting the river and going on to the Mediterranean. But they would run into great difficulties because the Ottoman Empire had a way bigger fleet than the Phoenicians had. Even though because the Venetians were they were facing a lot of issues, their financial troubles, etc. And at one point, they were moored in this river, um, and what happened was that basically they were waiting for the Ottomans to approach, but one of the boats, one of the ships had deserted them and walked over to the Ottomans, told them all about their weaknesses and what they were doing. And then when they approached, some of the Phoenicians got cold feet and they cut the anchors, and it ended up that Cort Adeler, his son Giorgio Grande, which was the main ship of the fleet, he because it was the biggest and he was the most capable. He was there alone, and he was surrounded by Ottoman ships, and he was entered. Like his ship was attacked by and covered by three huge Turkish ships. But what he did was he basically, through his bravery, got off the ship, entered the other ship, killed like 200 Turks, almost managed to take the Turkish ship until they were able to get like other troops to help, and then um, he had a like through his bravery he was able to take a victory over the Turks, although the Turks were still able to get out of the port. But because of his bravery, he soon became an admiral, and he was even got um, the let me see, what was it called again? Um, so he was the flag captain, and with his ship, he was able to attack a row of Turkish galleys and was able to sink 15 of them. And then, oh yeah, and then the Turkish garrison of Tenedos surrendered to him, and then he was, uh, yeah, he was made a knight in the Order of San Marco, and then the Senate gave him a yearly pension of 1,400 gold ducats a year. So, or yeah, yearly anyway. And then in 1616, he was made a vice admiral. Anyway, there were a lot of battles. So, like in one of the battles, he stormed a ship, bare chested, as they were about to lose, and there were like cannons going off everywhere. And you have to imagine they were using black powdered gunpowder at the time, which creates enormous amount of smoke. So and the bullets were they were and the cannon bullets were going everywhere, musket bullets going everywhere. They would hit pieces of rope, they would hit wood, it would splinter, it would get into your body, your bones would shatter, like tooth would be knocked out of you. Like there was like it was like horrible, like it was really bad. Um, like a lot of his crew would die, and like people would like so it was pretty intense fighting, so to speak. It wasn't for the faint of heart. But at one point, there was this other admiral ship of the Ottoman fleet with the Pasha, which is like an Turkish admiral. Um, and when Kurtz entered the ship of the Pasha, he was pierced in the side by an arrow, then struck by a saber, first in his left arm, and then I think in his shoulder. But despite that, he was able to, in one swing, cut off the head of the Pasha, the Ottoman emperor, and he took it back with him, and that became like part of his emblem. So of his later he became a royal. But that was like his most famous battle. So he was yeah he was like turned to like the most highly regarded admiral within the Venetian Navy, and no foreigner ever gained as much respect as he did with the Venetians. Um, but beside that, he went back to the Netherlands. He married his wife there, and took the son as his own. They married in a Lutheran church, by the way. Um, and Yeah, and he became a part of basically of the Dutch the merchant class. So he bought this house, or had this house built in Amsterdam that's still there. I'll include a picture in the video and a link. Just basically has his emblem on there because he changed his last name from Adelar, well, from Adelborst, which is like that low rank sea person, to Adelar, which is Dutch for eagle, which he found more fitting for somebody because he was then lifted to royal, later lifted to the royal state. Um, and he because he married his unfortunately his wife died, and he remarried into a royal family. on the Dutch side. Um, so yeah, so he became very successful. He got three more kids. He Although he did lose his brother in actually in fighting against the Turks as well. And he ended up going back to Denmark to Copenhagen, and there he played an important role in building the Danish Navy. And the Danes, they're actually rebuilding Amsterdam and Copenhagen. If you look at Copenhagen, a lot of it was modeled after what the Dutch were doing. So there were actually a lot of Dutch people there as well, building Copenhagen as a city. But yeah, he became this admiral, and he was well regarded by the Danish king. Fully trusted to rebuild this Danish navy because they were having problems with the Swedes. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened, but basically what it comes down to is like he introduced galleys, he introduced a lot of modern warfare techniques that he saw that worked well against the Spaniards and later against the Ottomans to the Danish navy. But he unfortunately, when it came down to this big Swedish Danish naval battle, everybody on his ship had to dock because of a huge storm. He was able to do it on the sea, and while the Swedes lost a lot of ships, he was able to save all their ships of the Danish Navy, Danish-Norwegian Navy. But both sides ended up losing a lot of people to typhus, including himself. So he was brought back to his house with his Dutch wife in Copenhagen, and that's where he died at home from typhus. But yeah, anyway, I know I'm breaking it off a bit quickly now, but this guy was incredibly amazing, and I just think that the time he was living in, like you would be going away from your house for years, um, and not go home. His son ended up. He sent his oldest son to a Danish colony in what is current day Indonesia, and he came back to take over his father's business after he heard that his father had passed away. He hadn't seen his father in years, but what happened to him? He also ended up dying on the way over due to pneumonia. So yeah, it was extremely dangerous. So I think it's also interesting to think about that. You always think that, oh yeah, people were so rich at the time and so entitled. Well, if you were a sailor back in those days, your life expectancy was really, really bad. It was not good at all. And So, like sometimes they would send a ship and over 60% of the people would die. Like one of the adventures that Cort did, he sent a ship because he wanted to take over some of the Dutch trade, and he successfully did. By the way, he set up a trade mission to from Copenhagen to Indonesia, where he left his son there, which it made it back, but they lost like 70% of the people on the ship, and they still consider it an economic success. um, but yeah, like in the end, they were able to set up. And nowadays, you actually have, if you think of Maersk, is one of the largest. It's actually the largest shipping company in the world. It's a Danish company, and some of the routes were actually laid there, right there and then, by the brilliancy of Kurt, the small townsboy from Brevik, Norway, who went to the Netherlands to learn how to be a sailor, and ended up building all these strong relationships with the Dutch, well, not royals literally, but the Dutch rich, the people, the merchants, married into the to a royal family there, and started copying even some of the VOC trades to Indonesia for Denmark. and laying the foundation for a modernized Danish Norwegian fleet, which in the end ended up kicking Sweden's ass in a naval battle. But unfortunately, he wasn't there to see the fruits of his labor. So a very very interesting time. There's some some other keynotes I wanted to talk about. Um, so there's a trade dimension. So there's the impact. Oh yeah. So I thought also was interesting. He was good friends with Michiel de Ruiter, which, by the way, if you are able to see it, there's a movie called Michiel de Ruiter, and you can see it dubbed in English. I will put just a description to the movie. It is worth a watch. It's a good movie, considering the budget it was made. So Michiel de Ruiter was a Dutch naval hero, and they were friends. And part of what we know about him is from letters that were kept by Michiel. So we lost, unfortunately, the letters that Michiel wrote to Kurt, but we still have the letters that Kurt wrote to Michiel. And we know some things about, for example, that they would throw a party in his honor in Amsterdam, and all the like a lot of the rich and famous people were there, including Michiel de Ruiter, but also the mayor of Amsterdam. And then he would write to Michiel about how they had a drinking competition together, and basically, the mayor of Amsterdam had to be carried away because because he couldn't handle itself. It was like a form of manliness to be able to drink so much and still be able to walk home normally. So yeah, I thought it was funny to hear some of those things because there's still some of that culture. But yeah, very interesting way, very interesting man, interesting life. Um, and yeah, he at one point I think he did get also slaves from Africa sent to North America, one ship I believe. But yeah, I don't know. Like he also took a lot of Turkish slaves that would be sent to the galleys, and a lot of his men were taken as slaves as well, which was just a very different time of yeah to live in, I guess. So because he was actually quite religious and yeah, was trying to despite the drinking, I guess. You
Drinking
know
and trading slaves.
yeah, he did feel that he was fighting not just for profit against the Ottomans. He also thought he was fighting for Christianity, but he did notice at some point. He said, "Well, there's no way the Venetians are going to win this," and he was right. So that's why he went back to Holland and then later Denmark for yeah to focus on trade instead. So yeah. Anyway, that was my story. I know it's kind of random, but I just stumbled upon this book and I really enjoyed reading about this guy's life. I thought it was inspiring. I thought it put things a little bit into perspective. Like we always think that people back then were like so, or sometimes people are like, well, they're so. I don't know, like just because you live in a certain country, you need to feel privileged. Like, well, these people he ended up having a privileged life, but he easily could have been killed as well, or died, or in the end he did end up dying a rich man. Um, yeah. So, but a lot of people were dying at the time. So, especially a lot of the sailors and stuff, they would have a very, very rough time, and they would die of the most horrible diseases. And in those battles, there were no ambulances. There was no way to sedate people. Like if you were shot in the arm or something, they would just have to saw off your arm.
That
Yeah,
well,
they had no. The only sedation they would have was like alcohol or opium. That was
well,
it.
yeah, I don't know if they. I know during the Civil War or the war between the states, like in the United States, they a lot of times would cut off the arms and legs. Like Stonewall Jackson, who's there's a bit. He's part of the monument at Stone Mountain. He got shot in the arm, and they just sawed his arm off. Actually, it was friendly fire, and then he died later from complications of that, or I think it might have also been pneumonia. But at any rate, one reason why they sawed off so many arms and legs during the Civil War was because there was a new type of bullet invented called the Manet ball, which was kind of like a forerunner to a hollow point round, and it was designed to like make a big splattering mess as it goes through you and shatter your bones basically. But I think back then they would have still just been using round musket balls. So I don't know that they would have that sawing off arms and legs would have been the result every time or the standard treatment.
Well,
Like they
the problem is that the musket ball would hit like a mast or like a side of a ship,
mm,
or even a sail, and pieces of the boats would get all like would scatter throughout your body, and you would get like all these huge pieces of splinters that would like be like a shotgun basically going throughout your body.
you could get
Or
gangrene maybe from that. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, so it wouldn't be like an even like clean bullet entry. It would be like a lot of debris entering your body, and even
Mm.
like even the bullet would like hit somebody else's bones, shatter the bone, and the bone splinters would hit other people.
A
So
lot of shrapnel.
yeah, yeah. So it was pretty brutal time. Um, yeah, high risk, high reward kind of living, I guess. Um, And also, I just think it's interesting that people would just he would, and then see his father die or his mother die. Like he was out at sea in Venice.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think even when his wife died, it wasn't in town. So yeah, it's just interesting. And I also found it was interesting that like disease like I think it was Frederick the Third, I think was the king of Denmark at the time. That what he was good friends with, and Michiel was actually also Danish royalty, and he would write him to say, hey, give my regards, etc. But that he also died of pneumonia when he was like 50 something. And Cort was, how old was he when he died? He died 22 to 75. So he was 53. Yeah. Yeah. So, people, you could get pneumonia, you could get a boil, and you could die from it. So, or you could just drink some water and get like, that was like, had fecal matter in it, get like
Dysentery.
dysentery. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah.
So
Int-
now that we've said all this, if you were alive back then, would you sign up to go on one of those ships?
yeah, I don't know. Would you?
Heck no.
No, I don't think I would. I think I would
It-
just stay in the woods and become like a forest guard or something. I don't know. Start hunting. Yeah.
yeah, because like people talk about we live in an age where people like to trash talk Europeans in general and say that we're the worst thing in the world and we've done all this and we've done all that and all this stuff. And the thing is, one of the reasons why we colonized so much of the world is because our ancestors went through so much and they were willing to take these risks. Like I wouldn't take those risks. And if I was living in America, like even you're talking about just the United States and the way it expanded, like I wouldn't I don't know that I would even be willing to move out west, but these people they had a lot more testosterone than we did, and they
Yeah.
were willing to take bullets and torture and starvation and all kinds of things.
Well, because they were usually also fleeing from bullets and torture and starvation. Because
Yeah,
like,
some push-pull factors.
yeah, and at the time Norway was not rich. Like Norway has only been rich recently after they discovered oil. But for the longest time, and actually my next subject will also be about Norway, but more recent Norway, 19th century. Norway was incredibly poor, and there were a lot of issues with like alcoholism, all kinds of stuff that comes with poverty. So,
They
you know,
used to, I mean, but like in the Middle Ages, they definitely did their pillaging runs on the rest of Europe. Like they set up they founded the Russian culture, that became the Kiev Rus.
yeah.
So
And what I failed to mention was there was also this small ice age happening. So a lot of the winters were extra harsh. So they were really having a tough time. It gets cold up there, and
yeah,
yeah, and especially during like small ice age. Like when we look at those 17th century Dutch paintings, you see all these people like skating on the ice, and also when it comes to battles and stuff, like entire lakes would freeze over, or rivers would freeze over, and soldiers were just able to cross the lakes, and that would also create havoc. But because it was so cold, people were starving, and they were also looking for other ways to yeah, to make it. And there was a lot of disease because as soon as people are starving or not eating properly, you're more well, what do you call it, susceptible to catching diseases.
mm,
So yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that was my story. I thought I was gonna keep it short, but yeah.
it's all right,
So
man. I think our audience knows what to expect by now from us.
yeah,
So
cool. All
that's
right,
a
I'll
good
try
thing.
to get some good pictures for it. So of
Yeah.
course there are not a lot of photographs, but I'll try to get some paintings and stuff. But yeah, with that, I'd like to close it out and hope to see you in the next one. Anything you wanted to add, Ivor?
Uh, no, I think that's good. I think about this stuff a lot, and the things that our ancestors did, and a lot of times when I read this stuff, I just cannot imagine participating in this stuff myself. Like I would die so quickly, but it also makes me think about back then. Um, People saw kid with all this death and dying early, and also having your kids die. That's one reason why in the past something like birth control would have been inconceivable. Like back then, people didn't see kids as a burden; they saw them as a resource. You just hope that they're also your retirement plan, so you just hope that
Yeah,
your
and
kids survive, and
you
you
have
just
a
kind of
very high rate of infancy deaths. So a lot of people would lose their babies before they would ever reach like 1 or 2 years old. Um, if you look at the population of places like Norway, like I've been to Denmark before, where this Viking town, and then it had like the size of the town throughout the ages, throughout hundreds of years, and it was basically constant
mm,
because back then they didn't have birth control, but life was tough. You wouldn't have, like, I know after the war we had a lot of families here in Holland that had like large families of 8, 10, even 12 people, but that wouldn't have happened back then because you'd be working, you'd be starving, a lot of your kids wouldn't make it. It's just they were harsh environments. So yeah.
your wife might not make it either, and then you got to go find another one. A lot of women
Yeah.
die childbirth.
Yeah.
I did have one question. You said he went on board a Turkish ship and killed like 200 Turks by himself.
No, not by himself, with his crew, of course. Yeah,
Okay.
no, yeah, not single-handed.
I was
He did single-handedly cut off this guy's head,
saying, yeah,
which is fairly likely to have happened. So quite likely. So yeah, later on there were some people that were trying to um, like throw dirt on his name. I'm not saying it rightly, but besmear him,
yeah.
but those have all been proven to be wrong.
Hmm.
And the story I just told you is most likely, I'm not, well, didn't go into details, but this is what happened to his life. So yeah, so yeah, pretty interesting guy. So
Yeah, sounds like it. I was wondering if maybe this is like the inspiration for Conan the Barbarian. except that's, obviously he's from a much more advanced time period, but there's a lot of those stories about like one guy that's just wrecking all the enemies by himself. Conan didn't wear a shirt either.
Well, yeah, he also knew how to inspire his people. I don't know if Conan is more of a one guy kind of one man show kind of guy. So
Yeah, I've read lots of.
yeah, I don't think Conan is very religious either.
Well, he is. He just worships a different Crom or whatever. But yeah, like a lot of the entertainment, that we had like in the last century that people thought was good, where you have like the strong male character that does like so much damage to the enemies all by himself. It goes back to older mythologies of like one guy like Odysseus or Ram or Achilles. All these guys just like trashing and thrashing enemies all by themselves. And I was thinking, man, that's just what it kind of reminded me of when you talked about like he's fighting without, because they were still wearing armor back then. That was a part of the normal gear, and this guy's fighting without a shirt. So it got me thinking about.
I don't know if they
First,
would be wearing armor in the naval, because I don't think armor would have helped against. Would they? I don't know.
they still wore armor. Armor went away mainly in the 1600s. They were still wearing armor, but they're not doing the full body armor. They have like a helmet and a chest plate, kind of like riot gear. Like armor kind of ended in the way that it started. It starts with a helmet and a chest plate, and then those are the first things to go on, and then the last things to go off. Although the Spanish, when they were taking over Central and South America, they actually kind of extended the use of the armor because the people here were so primitive by comparison. I mean, they were the Amerindians that they dealt with did actually have civilizations, but they were still using stone weapons and arrows. So the armor became useful again. It gave them an advantage when dealing with those people. More of an advantage there than they would have had in Europe. Pretty
Yeah,
much
but
deflect everything.
I don't think the Navy wore armor though.
Well, I don't know about the Dutch Navy, but definitely the Spanish Navy did, because you can see pictures of them. The conquistadors and all that.
Okay, I'll try to find this out because I have a feeling the Dutch won because it wasn't like conquistadors, like it wasn't. It was mostly just sailors.
There's still a lot of CQC though, even when you pull alongside, especially when you pull alongside another ship, and if you're going to board the other ship.
Yeah,
I'm sure we'll see whenever. I know some of those battles with Turks. Like I looked up, both sides were still wearing armor, although Europeans tended to wear more armor than Turks.
Yeah, you're right. I did find some examples just now.
Yeah. 1700s is when it goes away for the most part, except you still have these special units called cuirassiers, which are like horsemen that have helmets and breastplates. But then in America, we have like almost no history of armor at all, because I mean, unless you count like technically our history doesn't start with America because it's a colony of Europe, so it starts there. But as far as United States existed, we didn't have armor like during the War of Independence or later. Not until I think I want to say, yeah, we still didn't have armor during the Civil War. I think probably World War I, or maybe the Spanish-American War, and then mainly it was helmets to protect from shrapnel. Now the soldiers are like almost fully armored, and I don't know if they're still doing it, but like a few years ago they were developing like a full Iron Man type suit of armor that's supposed to cover the whole soldier, and there's going to be like some hydraulics with it so that he doesn't have to carry the weight of his armor, and maybe give him an extra stronger grip. Like almost like an exo.
I'll include some pictures because I'm just finding pictures now. It was very light on the armor, what I can find.
They should still be having a helmet and a breastplate
Nope,
because they
not
no
all, not
not
all.
all.
No.
Yeah, probably in the sea you won't have as much because if you fall over the side, it's going to take you to the bottom.
Yeah.
But
And
it's
it was a lot of fishermen and stuff like that. So it was, they weren't like officially.
yes,
Yeah.
informal army,
Yeah.
or
A
known as
lot of
pirates.
the ships had were able to carry cannons as well, the trade ships. So yeah. All right, man. Well, I'm gonna call it a night. So with that, I want to bid you adieu, and hope to see you in the next one. All right, man.
Great, good one.
Talk to you later.